Hi all, let's look at another amazing game from the Grand Chess Tour in Paris, the rapid section of the events. Magnus Carlsen was playing white against Etienne Bacrot, so one of the top French players. E4, E5 from Bacrot, knight F3, knight C6. We have Gyoko piano territory. White castles, knight F6. Looks pretty standard so far. C3, A6, giving the bishop a retreat square. A4 to stop any B5 later. Black castles, rook E1. H6, stopping what could be an annoying pin. And so does white, mirrors that. Bishop E6 from Bacrot. So sometimes black wants to just play with that F file. And in fact, Magnus encouraged it. Why would he do this? Bishop takes E6. Maybe a lot of club players would steer away from this move because it potentially generates some counterplay for black along that F file. We've already got this bishop already menacingly on F2. So why would white be interested in doing this? We can see a few things, though, that might be pros for white in doing this. The double pawns clearly. But how to actually exploit those double pawns? Maybe actually first white would want to undouble them and then weaken E5. And then we'd have this pawn island, an island of 2 there. So you can see we could have 3 pawn islands there if white plays to undouble the pawns later. But otherwise it looks pretty scary, and you'd have to sort of make sure you can neutralize the F-file pressure here. So let's see how the game evolves. B4, bishop A7, knight BD2, knight E7, and this knight looks to be heading for that key attacking square as well. So it looks very logical. Knight F1, knight G6, rook A2, and this is the first sign that white is kind of creating a defensive posture, but I think while he's doing this, he wants to inflict fundamentally further structural damage on black, but he has to neutralize the dynamic play of black, and it does seem to be coordinated pressure here and pretty scary. But here, bishop E3, the knight is also well equipped to neutralize this bishop. So the sting is kind of being taken out gradually of black's pressure. As long as there's no knight takes H3, the rook is supporting F3 now. So D4 finally. It seems paradoxical to want to undouble the pawns, but it's trying to create, I think, in my view, a more exploitable type of weakness. So actually by, well, in fact, if black doesn't take, yeah, then there's still double pawns after D takes potentially. But black has the option of either taking or allowing D5. And this becomes even more subtle actually. If it's not about the structural change I mentioned about, then what is it actually about? And we see after queen F6, the move king H2 is played. And in fact, black doesn't hang about here for the possibility of D takes, it seems. He does actually play E takes, so he's undoubling his pawns. It seems as though black's getting all he wants. He's not only got this kind of F file, setting up an F file to play with, and the outpost square, he's undoubling his pawns. So what is the method in white's apparent slight madness here after C takes? Well, white does have a more aggressive set of pawns here. These 2 pawns are more aggressive than black's right now. And in fact, there is something very specific about this position revealed here. First of all, if black does D5, then E5 might be good, and that's a nice kind of bind potentially, but also maybe even E takes. Let's have a quick look at D5 just to be sure from a more technical perspective. Yeah, I would have thought E5, it looks quite nice to play E5 here, and technically yeah, it seems an advantage here. So if D5 is out of the question, we have then E5, and you might think, well, this is the kind of thing where, why would white allow this? Isn't he passive? But the thing is now after D5, that the knight is actually stranded on F4, near stranded. It's only got H5. This knight with this space advantage, it does two things. First of all, tactically that knight is a bit more vulnerable, and second of all, if you look at this, what's happened on the C file here now, there is a target on C7. So yeah, by black, taking, he's actually unveiled the C file pressure. So that's interesting. Black tries to sort of get rid of the target now on that C file immediately. But then we're left with this issue, and in fact Magnus taps into that with G3. And it's interesting here that this knight is kind of stranded, because if the knight goes back, then there's knight E1 here, which is playable because the rook's holding F2, the queen's on H5, and how does black hold the knight? You might say queen G5, yes. D takes and queen takes though. Yeah, that's at a cost. And look at these pawns. Yeah, white's just better here. Just to show the example there. So there are some issues to handle. This knight is kind of a little bit stranded. It's funny because you wouldn't really think of playing this way with bishop takes E6. So that's why I find the whole game kind of fascinating, that an issue is actually made of the knight on F4 in these variations at least. Black did something incredibly radical here actually. He just sacked the knight on its square with c takes d5. So we have here a very exciting continuation. Now d4, these pawns look a bit menacing. Has black really got enough? This looks like a key defensive move though. So both the second and the third ranks are more solid in a way with these rooks, kind of defending them. But also now after knight e1 there's the possibility of rook g3 swinging in for some attacking potential. But in fact now after d5, yeah, black's trying to liberate his pawn center to get them really aggressive. But we have the g3 square is actually used by the knight here. Okay, rook ac2, and the other knight joins it. So we've got two knights joining each other here, and two rooks joining each other here. It's, in a way, it's aesthetically amusing position if you look at this. It's strange, and black's trying to liberate his center, and both his rooks are actually quite aggressive. In fact, all of black's pieces are quite aggressive here, but he is a piece down. So king h8, queen g4, and now further aggression in the center, d3. But are these pawns slightly vulnerable? We have knight takes f4, e takes, now knight h5, queen g5. Black is content to be playing a piece down here. But in this position, white is grabbing that pawn. D takes. Now perhaps the most scientifically correct move is rook d7. So this might not be as smooth as Maurice Ashley might have said to Magnus Carlsen based on this game. Rook d6 might not be as accurate as rook d7. I'll give you an example. Rook d7, yeah, is going for g7. If queen takes, here, g6, knight g7, yeah, you'd have to factor in this idea is looking a little bit computer generated now, because it's some weird moves you're going to have difficulty finding in blitz, but white could end up being much better for sure. So yeah, maybe from a scientific perspective, rook d7 is the way to go here. But we have Magnus playing rook d6, which is great as well actually. Queen takes, because the rook is simply going behind that pawn. Tarrasch rule is kind of invoked, and that pawn's kind of loose here. Black's last chance to really put up resistance, maybe rook c4. And here, this continuation is still a clear advantage for white though. He's a piece up. So yeah, Magnus's continuation is fairly clear and logical really. So we have rook cf8, rook d2, and now the rooks actually prevent, now with the doubling they prevent actually any g5 from black later. So we have e3, and also support knight f6 of course here. So if black plays g6, there's knight f6 as well to consider. We have f takes, f3, and the point here now, knight f4, blunting the pawn so the king can handle this pawn, and only g5 is punished by rook takes h6 here. So in other words, this pawn is about to go, and black resigned here. I'll give you an example continuation. f2, king g2. Now say black tries to support the pawn. Then we have the punishment, rook takes h6, rook hg6, and rook takes g5 simply, eliminating those two as well. And the pawn's doomed or blockaded here with king f1 if rook takes. Yeah, we can just do anything here. We can just blockade. So yeah, the game ended on knight f4. It seems, to me that Magnus had control of the game. There wasn't too many issues. He was always a little bit better in this game, and played very logically. And that's really, in rapid chess. Yeah, what does one expect? So I hope you enjoyed this, got something out of it. I found it slightly fascinating and learned the f-file counterplay, so I thought I'd go over this particular game. There are some really subtle downsides being picked on, allowing black's potentially aggressive knight, that the knight itself could, that duality, it could actually be a tactical liability. But also this c-file, like I said, there's some subtle stuff going on. It's not as clear cut as black just having a fantastic fun game, as it seems. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.